Somebody bought this engine and wanted me to put it in the car for him. And the old engine's here. And it's a dual port engine. It had dual type 3 carbs. Ran really good. It's a little wet there. Who knows where it's coming from, but it's not serious. It didn't really leak. This oil's from the oil cap. Blows out. It wasn't sealing well. That could be this what this is from the fan blowing the stuff around. And so it ends up over here. So he bought this just because he had it for a while. He put this thing in. They had a single, this is a single relief case. It doesn't have a deep stud and it has 8mm studs, head studs. It has small galleys and it had a single port cooler on it, which I took off, and I drilled the holes out in the ears here, put this on it. Never seen a case like this. This side here that you're looking at, that's machined. Why? I don't know. This side, same thing. Serial number. I don't know what this came in. I don't know what that number is for, but I can't imagine what year this thing came in new. Maybe it was replaced and somebody put a different serial number on it. Maybe the factory. The H implies that you would see that on a 67. But anyway, there you go. So we put it in the car. I put the carbs on. Couldn't get it to run right. Just pretty much gave up on it. Before we actually put it in the car, we noticed this had an insert. There was an insert here for this plug. And what else? Oh, it had heater boxes on it. We took the heater boxes off. The inside of the port was sooty. But if you took the plugs out, the pistons looked brand new. They had no carbon on them. So who knows what happened here. And what I did before we put it in is the cooler. I set the end plate. It was at the limit, so I toned it down a little. And I torqued the heads and, tuned it up. I changed that. Sealed the pump. Used silicone here. Snug it up. Let it dry for overnight even. And then just tighten it up and peel it away. This stuff will never leak. This will someday. This will never leak. Not for a long time. A lot of them leak right there. Takes 2 gaskets, one on each side of that plate. Put some stuff on it. Don't assume you can get by with one gasket or just the plate. The gasket on each side and the plate in the middle. So we get in the car, drive it. Couldn't get it to run. I went nuts with the thing, adjusting carbs. I knew it wasn't the carbs. There was no air leaks. Whenever you build an engine, no air leaks, no leaks. These gaskets are the plastic Bakelite. I put my own gasket material on them. That's this stuff. You buy this at, I've got this at O'Reilly. You cut it, glue it on with 3M weather strip adhesive. You don't need a lot of glue. You smear some around, put it on. Then after it dries, you clean it up with the file. You clean it up with the file. Use a file around the edges, file the excess paper away. It looked like a brand new gasket. It's a better gasket than this came with new. If this gasket leaks, I've seen one where the thing would start and run great, and then it wouldn't. It would not start. Then it would start and run great. It was intermittent. Somebody went nuts with the tune-ups, needle valves, you name it, but they didn't change these, and that's all it was. That vehicle, I put those carbs on that one years ago, 10, 15 years ago. I used the steel gaskets, and they worked for a long time, and then one day it started acting out. And so that's all I did essentially to make that thing work was change these. Or probably put plastic, the Bakelite ones on with new paper. So anyway, the thing doesn't run good. We don't know what to do with it. So we check the compression. And it's fine. So I go, okay, we're going to check it, do a leak down test. What a leak down test is you want to imagine this piston at top dead center and both valves are closed. And you connect a hose to this that you connect to an air compressor. And you don't want the compressor on because you don't want to listen to it. You need to hear this. What it is you turn the valve on and you'll hear air go in here. and it might try to make the piston go down. So you want to hold this with a wrench. And then you listen for air coming out of here, or out of the tailpipes, or here at the cooler. I mean the cap. This, the sound you're going to hear from here is from the ring gaps. So that's okay. The sound you're going to hear from the tailpipe or the intake, like at the carb, you just put your ear to the carburetor, you'll hear it. That means it's leaking at an intake valve. So the rings are always going to make sound. Every car, they pretty much even sound the same because they all have about the same gap. Every car is pretty much the same gap, just enough so they won't touch. The gap is something you need to pay attention to. If you buy new rings, you should probably check them to make sure the ends don't touch, but you don't have to get all scientific about gap. It's just specifically there so the rings won't touch. If they touch, like if you're clamping a ring compressor onto a piston and you squeeze too hard, it makes the ends of the rings touch and it'll break it. So anyway, we had sound coming out of this side and this side, and so we pulled the heads off. And what I found was this. This is the valve, one of the valves that was in it. And if you look, you can see that shiny part right here. This part. That's where it was touching the valve seat. And it was leaking. This is one of the heads. This is the exhaust port valve seat. And it's got soot because it was leaking when it's closed. And this is the intake. And if you look, you can see places around it where it's uneven. See, it's dark over here because the valve never really touched there. Just because it's shiny all the way around, or it touches all the way around the valve, it doesn't mean it's touching all the way around this when it's all the way down. There's gaps. So that's what was wrong with it. These are in it so I could check the compression ratio. I put this in here to pour fluid to try and see where this thing was before I worked on it. So I pulled the heads off, pulled the engine out again. It was all in. You have to put the carbs on after you put it in the car. It was a lot of work. And found this problem. That was one of the old heads. So we bought new heads. And these valves, this distance on these valves, these are stainless and they came in that head. This is 3.8 millimeters, this face. This is every other valve you've ever seen at VW engine, you know, except maybe 36 and so forth. This is 2. What was it? Let me check it again. Yeah. 3.8 normal, 2.8 these. Okay, so what happened was these were in it, and I go, well, I wasn't even thinking of. I noticed they looked narrow, but that wasn't the issue. I put some lapping compound on it to see where the valve touches the seat. And it's hard to tell from that angle. Let's see. It's touching real close to this edge, just like the old ones, just like the old valves. See, there's the old one. There's an old one. Look where it is on this head. This is a new head, and it's in the same place. So I'm not going to use this valve because this is narrow. I put a German one in it, or a German. It's the normal 3.8. And look where it touches. It's right at the edge on this exhaust, and the intakes were the same way. And this is the exhaust that came out of the new heads too. Same width, 2.8. And see where the seat's touching right at the edge. If you look at the Volkswagen instructions from the people that designed this thing, they want this to be in the middle. And on an intake, the width of this contact place, the width of this is supposed to be 1.3 millimeters, I believe, minimum for an intake. And for an exhaust, it's 1.7. That's the minimum width for this mark that's going to make when you check it with lapping compound. You can use dye. I always try to get it in the middle, like Volkswagen wants. It's in the book, and I want this minimum length or width because as it wears, as the car runs, it's going to get wider. So you want to start out narrow and get wider. You don't want to start out wide and because it's not going to get narrow, and it's going to start, going down into the seat and it's going to start sealing poorly. So you want to start in the middle. So this valve wouldn't work either. Couldn't get it right. So what I realized is that the diameter of the seat on these new heads is too small of an outside diameter. So you can't cut it right. You can't get this to where you want it. No matter how much you cut or where you cut, you're just going to end up ruining the seat. So I ordered some different valves that are each 40 thousandths bigger in diameter. So these are 35.5. They were 36.5, and I don't even remember, these are 30 something, but they're a millimeter bigger than these exhausts. So the valves came. I've done this before with someone had replaced seats in a head for me, replaced these, and they couldn't get the intakes to seat right, so we got 1 millimeter bigger valves. This time they came, the intakes were 2 millimeters bigger, and the exhausts were 1 millimeter bigger. So, and I had my machinist make the 2 millimeter two big ones, brought them down a millimeter, and they were perfect. I mean, it's looked like I don't know how he did it to get this in the right place, and the same exact width as these. So we did those heads. While we were at it, before I took the cylinders off, I checked the deck height, and it was 1.9 millimeters, which is a lot. It should be, usually it's about 1.5 millimeters. So I thought, that's weird, you know, that'll give you low compression. And this did. When I did the math, this thing had less than 7.3 for a dual port, and that right there is gutless. You add this in, this bad seating, more gutless, doesn't run right, won't idle. This makes an idle problem. You can't adjust it right, because this is basically like when the engine's running, you want it to suck the air in and squeeze it and explode. Well, we're sucking air in through the intake, then we squeeze it to explode. Some of it's leaking backwards out through the intake manifold. So cars don't work too good that way. And there you have. And the other thing is when one's squeezing, it's blowing this mixture, whatever you want to call it, partially burned stuff this way, and another cylinder that's sucking in is pulling some of this stuff that's being blown out here where it shouldn't be. So leaky intake valves make cars run really bad. They'll make a fuel injection car run. It'll run, then it won't start, then it'll run good, then it'll start right up, then it won't start. And this could happen. It's common on those to do that kind of thing, and also air leaks. And that's why this is the most important gasketing that you're going to do on your cars. All your air leaks on fuel injection cars, hoses that are connected to below the flap in the carburetor, between the flap and the engine, that's an air leak. Okay, the throttle flap, that's an air leak. Okay, anything that's above that, like a breather hose, this doesn't have any effect on the way it runs. No effect. So anyway, I pull the cylinders off, and they have 1 millimeter shims underneath. So what I realized also is this area was it looked like somebody machined it into where the cylinder is. But just the diameter of the base of the cylinder. Like it was stepped. There was this, track around there, this drop. And that's probably, I don't know. The reason that was there is because somebody drove this in the past with loose heads. Heads were loose, the cylinders wiggled around, they wore the case. Both sides did it. So I don't know why they put the shim in, because if they would have left it, because of this stepped area, when you put the cylinder on, you have less deck height. And doing the math, that step was about 0.5 millimeter, because without the shim, it had 0.8 deck, and usually get like 1.4, 1.5, something like that. So this thing was about 0.5 millimeter worn in. So I went, oh, okay. So what I did was I took all the studs out, and I lapped every cylinder individually. I even marked them so they go back in the same place. And I needed to use the shim again. I used the shim again. And what I did was I ground the outside diameter of the shim, the outside edge of the shim, so that it would be smaller than the mating surface at the bottom of the cylinder when I moved it back and forth. So because I lapped it with the cylinder, if I put it in and the shim overlaps the side of the cylinder, it'll hit the step and the cylinder won't mate with the case. So I just ground them a little around the edges until I knew that